All right, so for this last and final part, we will take a look at the Power BI section and what I've created in Power BI. So this is what the final dashboard looks like. I may make some changes to it in the future. I'm not sure yet, but for right now, this is the final version of the NFL dashboard. And before I get into the dashboard, I want to go through how I loaded in the data, the changes I made to the data, and we could start by going to the Power Query Editor. And while that loads up, how I loaded in the data was that I loaded in the tables one by one, or I only loaded in tables I only needed to focus on for a particular part. Let's say if I was focusing on creating a passing page for the dashboard, I would only load in the passing stats table and any other tables that related to it. Maybe a players list table or a teams table that was already loaded in. So I didn't import or load in all the tables at once. I decided to go with a slower route and a little bit more methodical in how I loaded in these tables. So with the Power Query Editor open now, I made several changes to the data that was imported. So I'll go through each table and I'll tell you each of the changes I did. So this final team name changes. This table is basically a end all be all team name for all of the teams that we have. So you can see that I added an index column. I also was able to get the old team names into this table. So you have the Washington football team and the Washington Redskins. Then you also have the Los Angeles Rams and St. Louis Rams, and then the Los Angeles Chargers and the San Diego Chargers. So those teams are exactly the same. And I created the index column because I needed to sort the teams by in alphabetical order, or how the NFL usually has them sorted by. And I had to use a number more than once for teams that are the same team generally but have changed their name. And because of this, you cannot have two values, or you cannot have one value with two different values. They're not going to let you sort by that. So I had to use duplicated numbers, and then that's basically it for this one. But this table really connects to all of the other tables in our table diagram. The date for today is just basically a table for the date. The stand-in search is just basically going to look at the current year standing, or whichever season we're in, and it's going to return the standings for the whole NFL, AFC, and NFC conference, along with the division. So I'm expecting to change this to 2021, but as of right now, it's August 31st and the season has not started yet. So I have to go with 2020 data. And you'll notice that I went with 2020 data to start off with, but when the season starts, I'm expecting the data to change to 2021. So we have our news table. Nothing too spectacular here. We have another table that I created, and this is because in one of the tables they did not have a week number. So this is the only column that they had, which is this week column, and it was not properly sorted. Like week 18 would be like the 10th row if I were to sort by the week. And looking at it logically, it didn't make sense and it was a bit weird. So basically all I had to do was just take a list from that table, create it into a new table, and then I just added the index column, and then now we could sort by the week number correctly. So you can see all the week numbers are in proper order from 1 to 18, and that's basically all we did. And with Power BI, when you're in the Power Query Editor, it'll tell you what changes you made or what features that you have applied to a certain table. So games listing home games, and the reason why I have home games and away games, this is because I could not figure out a way to filter two columns at once. So if I wanted to see the Miami Dolphins, all of the Miami Dolphins home game, they had a column where the Miami Dolphins had their home games and then they had their away games. But if we were to filter on the Power BI dashboard the Miami Dolphins home games, I wouldn't be able to see their away games. And so I had to create two tables, one for home and one for away. They're separate tables, but they work in tandem. And you'll be able to see all of their home games and all of their away games. Like, it's not that big of a deal, and I think it kind of looks a little bit better having them split, but typically you would want to have all of them underneath one table, but in Power BI, I don't really think it's possible, especially since I'm not dealing with numbers or measures exactly or figures exactly to filter two columns at once. Next up, we have the injuries, and we didn't really do nothing to the injuries here. If you remember, we created the query in SSMS where we had the team name and the transaction table, or excuse me, where we had the injuries team name and the transaction team name combined into a single query, and we're going to take a look at that later. Then we have the transaction tables, and basically all I did here was duplicate this team column and then just trimmed it because for some reason Spot Rack, they had some spaces for the team name, and I wanted to cut down or trim it down so that it can match perfectly with another table I was going to load in later. And that's basically it. And I also want to mention, after we got done with the Power Query editor, we changed the profile player profile link to a web URL and the player picture to image URL, and we'll get there eventually, but it's one little detail that we did to get the players' pictures loaded in. The next table is called editing team name, and in the document and in the video in the sequel part, I mentioned that some of the tables that CBS Sports use, or mainly for the games listing table, they use the first part of the team name, which is basically the city. So I had to create a column delimiter to get the first part of that team name so that it could split properly and we could connect that table or this table to the home games listing and the away games listing. Now, the delimiter was the space button, but there are some teams who have more than one space, like the Los Angeles Chargers or the New England Patriots. For those teams, I basically just had to change them to reflect the correct value, and it was nothing hard to figure out or do. And then you can see this is where I do a lot of the testing, where I make changes, because I don't really like making changes on the original tables, and I rather just connect it to other tables. So that's basically all I did here. And then you can see here we have the index column as well, and then we have all of our team names, old and new. And then this is just a duplicate of the final team name changes. And then we have the game listing away games. We talked about the home games, and away games is basically the same thing. So the team abbreviations, if you can remember that this is going to come from the query that we built, where it's coming from two tables. It's coming from the injuries tables from cbssports.com, and it's coming from the transactions table from Spot Rack. And this is the resultant output. So when we find a solution, or when I found a solution to connect the team abbreviation to a full team name, this table was very important, because this table would go back and connect to the injuries table, and it would go back and connect to the transaction table as well. And the solution that I found, and this was a bit of a time saver, I decided to look on the internet for NFL teams abbreviation with their team names, and I was able to find a file on GitHub that I downloaded. And the person, I'm not really sure how to pronounce his username, but uh, shout out to him, or thank you for him for providing this file publicly to the internet. He had the NFL team name, and then he had their abbreviation. I would say 95% it was spot on, but in my data set and the one that he used, I had to make a couple changes. Like, I had to change New York Giants, the abbreviation for New York Giants, New York Jets, and I believe I also had to change it for Jacksonville Jaguars. He had it as JAX, which isn't wrong, but in my data set, the Jacksonville Jaguars is JAC. So this is where this is where these two tables are going to connect to each other, and then the team abbreviation table is going to connect back to those injuries, and then transaction table. And not to mention that this table can also go back and connect to the final team name changes table, or any of the tables that have a full team name. And you can see here, we loaded in our players table. Nothing really too crazy about this one, except for that after the Power Query editor and in the table view, we changed these two columns data types. Or what, not the data types, but how they're viewed. So, and this is something I was testing out, the transaction abbreviation. I just wanted to see all of the abbreviations, or all of the team abbreviations that the transaction table had. So now we're looking at the games played winners, and of course we're going to have the games played losers. So this is the same thing with the upcoming games. We can't filter two rows at once, especially when we're using columns that are, not figures but instead are text, because if we filter for the Kansas City Chiefs and we want to see the games that they won, we're not going to see the Kansas City Chiefs in the loser columns, because the Kansas City Chiefs is not going to play against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I had to create two tables again, one for the winner and one for the loser. And that's really basically all that we did there. I mean, this table can go back and connect to the final team name changes table, and that'll be pretty much it. And the reason why I keep referencing the final team name changes table is because that our slicer, which controls just about everything on each page, is coming from this table. So it's important that most of the tables, or if all of the tables, have some sort of connection to this final team name changes table. And then we have our legend. If you can remember, all the way at the beginning of the series or this project, we were scraping the NFL standings, and they had a bit of a legend key at the bottom of the page. So I decided to scrape that as well, and it's used in the Power BI dashboard. Then we have games played losers. Nothing really special here. I probably changed like one or two data types just because I needed to. Then we have team stats. Didn't change anything for that one. Team conversions. Nothing wrong with this one. NFL years. So these are tables that we've seen before, and these tables we don't really need to change, but I do want to talk about the next upcoming tables here, from passing stats all the way up to kicking, punting, returning stats. So these handful of tables, if you can remember in the document and in the video, I said that because we were not able to make a clean connection between the players table and the specific statistics tables, like the passing stats we'll take for instance, we have to do a bit of manipulation in the Power Query editor. So a good example to look at is Josh Allen or Alex Smith. Alex Smith, I'll go with because this was one that popped up in the Power Query editor earlier. And Alex Smith plays quarterback, and there's another Alex Smith that plays tight end in the NFL. So the query that we had brought in both of those Alex Smiths, which is not necessarily wrong, but because of the data and how the data was structured, we really had no other choice but to bring in both of them. But with the Power Query editor, I know since we are looking at the passing stats table that the tight end Alex Smith did not throw a pass or attempt a pass at all. So basically what I did is that players who had duplicated names but played different positions, and I knew that the statistical table I was looking at, they were not supposed to be in there. I filtered them out. So that way, when we look at the report in Power BI, we would have the proper values and we wouldn't have duplicated rows, not duplicated rows, but the rows wouldn't be added twice and it would show the incorrect value. So we took care of that. So for the passing stats table, I only filtered in the quarterback position just to make sure and just to be on the safe side. I mean, it's the best we could do with the data we had to work with, because as I mentioned earlier, Pro Football Reference, this table is coming from Pro Football Reference, and for some reason not every guy on here has a position for the season that they played. Like Agent McCarron, I know he's the quarterback, but they just do not have it listed here. I don't know why. This is probably something I have to ask them, but we was able to work our way around it. So quarterbacks are only for the passing stats. Rushing and receivers RBs are only for the running backs. And then we have another one for the it's only for the running backs, quarterbacks, and fullbacks. The Russian receiving RBs. Sorry about that. The wide receiver one is only for tight ends and wide receivers. And I do have pages on the Power BI report that splits them up. And then the defensive stats. So I filtered out any players on the offensive side of the ball for the defensive stats, so that way any offensive players wouldn't really be on there. And then we have kick, punt, return stats. Didn't really do too much here, decided to leave it as the same. We do have the special characters, and I wanted to leave it in because this is how Pro Football Reference have it on their site. So don't really want to deviate too far from their website. Then we have kicking and punting stats. Same thing here. Didn't really make changes. And that's really it for that table. So now with the last two tables that we have the depth chart, and then we have depth chart ordering. But I want to talk about the depth chart table first. And the thing or the issue that I ran into when I knew this was going to be an issue when I was scraping the depth chart table from CBSSports.com is that when you look at the depth chart, it's always ordered a certain way. You always have the quarterback, the running back, the receiver, the tight end, and then you move into the offensive line. And then from there, you move into the defensive line, and then you move into the linebackers, and then you move into the secondary. So there's a certain way that the depth chart is supposed to look. But when we scrape the depth chart from CBS Sports website, the computer doesn't really know how to order the depth chart. Like when I created the script is just going to grab the data and just throw the data in there. It's not going to sort it properly how it was scraped or the order it was scraped in. So I had to create a list from the depth chart table with all of the positions, and then I had to again use a index column to where we would number the positions correctly and as to how we view the data chart, or as to how we view the depth chart visually. So quarterbacks, running backs, fullbacks, wide receivers, those guys are going to be 1 through 4, and then everyone else is going to follow through. So with this table being completed, I then took this table and connected it back to the depth chart, and this position column is going to be sorted by the index column we had in the depth chart ordering. So when you go look at the depth chart for a particular team, it's going to be in the right order. It's going to be the quarterback first, then the running back, and then everyone else. If we did not do that, then the first player to appear would be the center, and then like the fullback, running back. It would just look very awkward. So we had to create a fix for that, or I had to create a fix for that. And that's basically all of the changes I did for the Power Query editor. And we can move on to the next thing now. So the next thing I want to look at, and we can look at the tables, is that, and I also won't go into much detail about this, but I did add some columns to some of the tables, and mainly those columns were like using a related function or using a lookup function if I needed to pull a team from another table. So you can see this is one of the columns that I added, and it's just going to do the lookup value function, and it's just going to return me the winner logo. And so from there, we'll have the winner logo, and then we could also have the loser logo as well. And it's not a majority of this Power BI section. It's a small part, but it's very vital and crucial into making sure that everything looks good and proper. So one last thing before we touch upon the dashboard is that I want to go over the database diagram. And again, on this one, I won't take too long, but I do want to point out that looking at the diagram now, it is pretty complicated. It's so many connections coming from this final team name changes to all of the tables that we loaded in. And so that's why I decided to load in the tables one by one and take a more slower approach, because if I were to load in all of the tables and queries at once, it would become very difficult to look through the tables and see what connections I need to make. But since we loaded in the table slowly, it was a lot easier to make the connections and figure out what connections we actually have. But this is one of the more complex table diagrams I would say I had created. And I wouldn't really call it a database diagram, because we're not really in a database, because we could load in tables, CSV files, and different types of files. So I'll call it a table diagram. So that's it for this part, and we can move on to the visualizations now. So this is the dashboard, and I have buttons here that when you click on them, it'll take you to the specific page, or the page that's titled the button. So team conversion statistics, if you click on that, it'll take you to the team conversion statistics page. And it's not doing anything now because in Power BI you have to control and click, but I believe on any other version of Power BI, like Power BI Mobile, you could just click it and it'll take you there. And then there's also a little note telling you that you click any button and it's going to take you to the corresponding page. So we could start with the overview. So just control and click. And this may take some time to load because I have OBS up and running in the background, or right now recording this video. And Power BI is pretty intensive, especially with all the data we've loaded in and all of the visualization. So that didn't take too long to load, and you can see that we have a plethora of information. But the main thing I want to stress first is that because there's so many pages on this dashboard or in this report, there is a back button on every page available except the home page. So if you click the red back button, you'll get taken back to the home page. So you won't have to navigate through the pages and get back to the home page. You could just click the back button and then click whichever page you want to look at next. So this will load in again, and hopefully it doesn't take as long. So as I was saying earlier, you have a plethora of information. We have this back button. We have a slicer here, and you could click on any team and it'll just only filter for that specific team. We could click the Miami Dolphins, and all of the pages or all of the tables will update, excuse me. And then we also have a slicer here at the bottom that'll give you a division selection. So you can select any team, or excuse me, you could select any division, and it's only going to return that team in the division. So I selected the Miami Dolphins, and so it's going to take some time for it to load. Usually it doesn't take this long to load, but I think because I have OBS running, it's going to take a little bit longer. So you can see, and the data might be a little bit old because I haven't refreshed the data yet on the desktop version. Miami Dolphins finished 6-10 or 10-6 on the season. You can see some other statistics about them. You have the news about the Miami Dolphins. This is by the latest news. You scroll over, you'll get when the article was published. Going back up top to the page, you have the home games for the Miami Dolphins, and then you have the away games for the Miami Dolphins as well. And if you click on the date for the link, it'll take you to that. It'll take you to a website to where tickets are being sold for that particular game. Then coming back down towards the bottom of the page, you have the injuries and suspensions. So CBS Sports website, they include suspensions on their injuries list as well. So that's pretty nice to have. And then we have the player picture, the player name, the reason they were out, and the status for them. So you can see that Adam Shaheen is questionable for week 1 at New England. And then for the transactions, same thing here. Looking at all the transactions for the Miami Dolphins. And then there's multiple selections you can make. You can look at it from 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021 so far. We do have data going back from 2010 and onwards, but I decided just to keep the last 4 years. And if I click to another team, if I control and click to another team, the Los Angeles Chargers, they'll pop up as well. So you can see that we have information on the Los Angeles Rams, not Chargers, excuse me, Los Angeles Rams and the Miami Dolphins on the same page, even though they play in 2 completely different conferences. And as I mentioned earlier, you do have the option to select the division. If we look at the NFC North, it's only going to return the teams in the NFC North. So that's something good to have. So you can see the NFC North standings, all of the teams. From that slicer selection that we made, we could go and select one team and look at them individually. And we can see all of the home games for the NFC North and all of the away games for the NFC North as well. Anything that happened, injuries, suspensions, any articles, or even transactions. So that's basically it for this page. This page is really meant for like a broad overview of the NFL and not really so much for like looking at one team in particular, but you definitely have the option to do that. The next page I want to look at is the team overview page. So we have the team overview page, and the slicer up here only allows for you to select one team. And it's really meant for and it's really meant for you to look at one team. So different from the overview page, we now have the games that have been won, the games that have been lost, but more of the same information. We have home games and away games, news, injuries and suspensions, and transactions. And at the bottom of the page, we have the Miami Dolphins record. And then I also have a legend here stating, or the legend coming from the NFL.com website for the standings. And then in team overview 2, again, you can only make one selection up here. Well, this slicer and the slicer on the team overview page, they're connected. So if you make a selection here, it's going to affect the other page and vice versa. This big box here is a browser. It's not going to load into the desktop version of Power BI, but I will show you where it loads in the Power BI mobile app. So currently we're on the Miami Dolphins, and if we were on the Power BI mobile app, it will show the Miami Dolphins website. So we scraped the website for each team earlier in this project, and so this is where it comes in handy and useful. And then we have our depth chart, and you can see our depth chart is looking correct so far. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver. And the depth chart, if you can remember, is updated every Friday. So this depth chart might be a little bit old, but it's updated every Friday, like a day or two before the game. And that's really much it for this page. And then we have team offensive and defensive statistics. So this is just basically what we've seen on the Pro Football Reference site. Didn't really change too much. There's not a lot of graphs involved here. We have a slicer for the team again. I believe you can select multiple teams, and you also have the years you want to look at and the division you want to look at as well. Team conversion statistics, again, more of the same of the last page, where you could just look at how that team performed for that particular season when it came to conversion stats. Next, we have passing stats, and we have a bit more visuals or graphs involved now. So you can see we have a simple card that shows the passing yards leader, touchdown leader, interception leader, and the player with the top QBR with a minimum of 300 pass attempts. Also have a scatter plot and a bar chart. And this one, you could select multiple teams, you could select multiple divisions. It doesn't really matter here, and you can see the year, the division, and the record for a particular team. I won't go through and filter through any team because it'll take some time to run. But this table is sorted by the passing yards. That's why it's called passing yards here. And then yards per game, it's sorted by the yards per game here. So we could look at the rushing and receiving stats, where it excludes the wide receivers. And you can see more so of the same thing on the passing stats. Just looking at how a player performed for any given season. You see the touchdown and receptions leader, all-purpose yards leader for the Miami Dolphins. And you could look at it as a whole, or division again, or by multiple teams. You can see that we have the rushing leaders and the percentage of all carries. So Myles Gaskin took a boatload, well, not really a boatload. Well, he did take a boatload of the carries for the Miami Dolphins in 2020. Now, moving on to rushing and receiving stats. This is for the wide receivers. So now, looking at the wide receivers, tight ends, you can see their receiving yards, players who led the team in receiving yards, or NFL, depending on how you want to filter and slice the data. We have another scatter plot, receiving yards leader. And then we also have this key influencer table. I decided to throw this in there to see what affects the receiving touchdowns. And this is something that it's not really important, but I decided to just throw in there just because it was a little bit different. Now on to the defensive stats. Again, more of the same thing. Going to look at how the players have performed defensively in any given season, and you can just scroll over on any other tables that are cut off or can't show the whole view, and you'll get more of the columns. So this one is sorted by the tackles, and this one here is sorted by the interceptions. And then you can see we have our tackles leader. So Jerome Baker had himself a real good season in 2020. And then we have the kick, punt, and return stats. So up top we have the kickoff stats. Field goals and punting is next, and then the return stats is the last table at the bottom. And you have all the same options of which year, the teams you want to select, or even the division you want to look at. Now on to the last few tables. We have the offensive and defensive leaders. Just a basic overview of the most common stats people look at, like the passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, tackles, interceptions, and sacks. And it's just going to only take the top 5 guys from each category, and it's going to be put into a bar graph. And you can see up here that I had to change it a little bit. I had to go with the team name, and the reason for that is because the logos were a little bit too big and they were kind of getting cut off. So I just decided to go with the team names. So you can see all of the passing leaders, or you can see all of the leaders in each category. And then the last page with player information, we have the players list. Originally, I wanted to include a browser in here that'll load in the specific player you filtered on, but Pro Football Reference uses HTML instead of HTML, and so that's what the browser uses, and it's not going to load in any HTML. So I had to just go with a simple table that looks at the player picture, and some basic information. But if you click on the player name, it'll take you to their profile picture. And then in the notes, it's just some notes. If a player has a star next to their name, they made the Pro Bowl. If they have a plus, they were first team All Pro. And then I have a tip for the browser. You only want to select one team if the browser is on any other web page, or any other, or on. You only want to select one team if the browser is on any of the pages. So using the back button here, we're taken back to the home page, and that's pretty much it for this dashboard. Hopefully it provides a lot of insight as to a player performance. Not really much why they did good, but how they did over a period of seasons, or even teams as well. All right. So the last thing that we have to do is upload our report or our dashboard to the Power BI server. And I've done that so far. I uploaded the file, the data set is there. And what I need to do now is just schedule a refresh for the data set. So if we go into settings and then we select the schedule refresh, our connections are good. The gateway is up and running. We are going to set a refresh time. So we'll add a time here. And because you cannot be so exact, like 8:15 or 8:02 with Power BI when it comes to refreshes, I have to go with 8 o'clock because the data is refreshed at 7:30 on the SSIS and SSMS side. So if I put it for 7:30, which I originally had it for 7:30, it worked the first time, but if it takes longer for the data to update and refresh, I don't want to have to wait a whole nother day for the data to come in. So I'm fine with having it set at 8, and maybe in the future I'll push the time earlier, but right now it's for 8 o'clock, and it's going to refresh every day. And then if anything fails, it knows to contact me. I have my email on there. And then we can see the status of our gateway. This is something that we did in our first project that we had to set up, and the and it's up and running, and our credentials are good. So everything is going to run pretty smoothly. And then we could also upload an image for the data set, and I'm gonna do that right now. So I'll choose the NFL logo, and then we have the logo of the NFL there. I'm not gonna give it a description, and we could just apply. Once we hit apply, we should be all good to go. All right, so you can now see we have a schedule refresh date at August 31st, 8 p.m. But I can also refresh the data set now, and this is what I'm going to do. So it's refreshing. You can tell by the symbol here. And once that symbol stops, it's pretty much done. And one thing I also want to note is that I'm going to have a separate video going over the Power BI mobile site, or the mobile app, going through the same dashboard again, because we didn't get to look at the browser in this video, but I did put an overlay of it on. And then you can also see that I have my other projects up and running as well. We refreshed yesterday at 5:33, but there wasn't any data because I was working on this project and my computer kind of got bogged down, so it took a long time for the Python scripts to run. But today the Python scripts will run and the database will be updated for my stock market project. So you can see the data was refreshed 3:06 p.m. August 31st, and the next time is at 8 p.m. on August 31st as well. So we'll have new data available to us, and we'll just have to see. But that's really much it for the report. If you want to download the Power BI file, I have all of the files uploaded on my shared folder. But that's pretty much it for Power BI, and we can move on to the conclusion now.